Board. Oh.
We just started.
It's official. Thank you, friends, for coming and taking the time to be with us. We have a very special presenter this evening. Before I introduce her, I just want to do a little bit of fun facts. There are restrooms straight down the hallway, and around the corner is a water station. So please help yourself to bio breaks as needed. You don't need to raise your hand or anything like that. There are some treats on the back table. There are some cups. We really try to do zero waste here. So if you want to use a cup and get some water, you can just return the used cup over there, and a fairy will take you home and wash them, and we'll reuse them again. I am Maria Barone, and I am a board member. I've been a board member for 2 years. And I do want to acknowledge that we are gathering in community this evening for a learning adventure on the unceded land of the Leon people. I'm going to take a moment to acknowledge that. I'm going to introduce Janelle Chojnacki. She's a recent graduate of the Master's in Wildlife program at Humboldt. And aside from that educational adventure, she has done research and studies in Mexico, Costa Rica, and the little island of Saipan for a few years. So she's had some pretty amazing experiences, and I could spend all your evening talking about Janelle, but I'm going to let her do the talking. So please welcome Janelle Chojnacki, and she will introduce her presentation.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks, everyone, for coming to learn about ravens and plovers. I'm just going to jump into it. So, talk my title, Ravens and Plovers, Local Research, Ecology and Fascinating Behavior of Two Species at Odds. Quick presentation outline. I'm going to start with a background on these two species, go into some information on global and local research. Then I'll talk about my research that I did for my master's degree, and I'll end with a discussion. So first, I'm going to ask you guys about your bird knowledge. So there are a few different bird species on here. Some of these photos are snowy plovers. Does anyone want to shout out which ones are plovers?
See.
Oh.
Whoa, spicy. Okay, any more guesses?
A and B.
E and
Okay.
F are not plovers.
A and B are snowies.
Is that Ken?
Yeah. Can you go full
Is that Ken Burton?
It is. It is.
Oh, I think Zoom, you guys are seeing. Someone on Zoom asked if I could go full screen.
C is a plover.
Okay, I'm just gonna keep going. A and B are snowy plovers. I'll just let the presentation show you guys.
Oh, there.
So yeah, A, B are snowy plovers. C is a plover, but it's a different species. So the snowy plovers have, we've got a male or really old female in A, and a female or a super young or winter male in B. So the males get a little bit of black on their face and their collar, but other than that, they've got totally white bellies, dark gray legs, short, thick black bills, and really big eyes. And you can see some of the differences here. Some of these other birds have yellow legs or longer bills. Yeah, so now we all know what a snowy plover looks like. I will be reviewing that slide at the end. So the range of the snowy plover, if you can see these colors here, they're pretty much all over the west coast of North and South America. There are some interior populations, that's that orange color, and then they're also in the Gulf of Mexico. And their foraging behavior and diet is pretty cool. I love the fact that the more I learn about wildlife, the more I realize you can tell a lot about what a species eats and how they get it by their physiology. So unlike something like a curlew, snowy plovers don't have really long legs, so they're not going out in the water. They're staying on the sand, and they had got really big eyes, and they use those to find food. And they have really short bills, so they're not probing in the sand. They're grabbing stuff off the surface. So their strategy is called like spot and chase or something. They see something and they run after it. Pretty simple, but fun to watch. They run so quickly. Their nesting habitat and ecology is also pretty interesting. Can anyone spot the nest in the top photo?
See the eggs. There's 3 eggs.
Nice.
Way over about a fifth of the way up.
Yes. Yeah, bottom left. Ooh, that's bright. So right there. So, you, yeah, so you can tell from this, they don't decorate their nests much. And that's because they rely on camouflage. So especially in areas with a bunch of cobble, like you can see here, their nests are really camouflaged when they're not on it. And if you remember from the coloration of the plover, they're like beige and white and kind of sand colored. They're camouflaged themselves too. So they don't try to hide their nests like a lot of songbirds do in a bush. They rely on camouflage of the eggs. And then these two scenes are really good examples of their nesting habitat in Humboldt County. They rely on really open beaches. They use their big eyes to spot predators from far away. And then they run away and leave their nest to be camouflaged by itself. And it works really well. They've made it this far. And these photos are both from, I think the bottom one is Big Lagoon and the top one is Stone Lagoon. Both from the lagoons.
The bottom one is.
Big Lagoon. Or Stone Lagoon. The lagoons. What? Yeah, they can nest in some weird places. They usually learn better in subsequent years. Their courtship strategy is interesting. That I think this video is working. So, like all that was it. That was it. And then he chases her off. Yeah, so you saw he was like on her and then he flipped on his back for a second and that wasn't a fluke. That's what happens. And when the sand is really fine, you can see the imprint of his wings and it's called a courtship angel. Someone in the chat asked how. People on Zoom, I don't know how to switch.
You have to unshare and then reshare just that window.
Okay. I'll give that a go.
Oh, I might be wrong. But I always act like I know it. So don't share your whole desktop, just.
That's what I had done before though.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong. More than, so then I'm right about being wrong. Wrong about things right.
I'm gonna try the other way. Just see what happens.
No, you just had it. It was better the other way. You just had it for a second.
No, she
Well, hold
didn't.
on, let me start my. What do you guys see on Zoom now? The
Yes.
big-
Way
Yay,
better.
yay.
Yes.
So was I right about being right or was I right about being wrong?
Yeah.
Shut up.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna show the courtship angel one more time. So that's plover reproduction. Parental care is a little opposite of what we know about a lot of animals. So both the female and the male tend to the nest while the eggs are incubating. Typically, the male sits on it at night because he's a little more colorful, and the female sits on it during the day because she's more sand colored. And then as soon as the eggs hatch, the chicks are precocial, so they can catch food on their own. They just need the parent to help keep watch for predators and tell them what to do besides finding food. And then a few days later, the female will leave and she'll either re-nest or just hang out. And the male will take care of the young for another 28 days or so. So this is probably a male or a super old female sitting on this chick. And I don't know if everyone's seen those photos of a male plover with like 3 pairs of legs underneath all the feathery fluff. I've seen that a lot. It's pretty precious. Some interesting behaviors of snowy plovers. Yeah, has anyone heard of the wing drag display or broken wing display? So plovers aren't the only bird that does this. There are a few other shorebirds that do it, but if a predator or something threatening comes nearby, they pretend like their wing is broken and they try to lead it away from the nest. And it's pretty interesting. If you ever encounter that on the beach, just follow the bird where it's leading you, because it's taking you away from its eggs or its chicks. Because like we saw in the few photos ago, those nests can be really hard to see. Yeah, someone in the chat wrote killdeer. Killdeer are another species that do that. We have a lot of killdeer here. Killdeer are also super vocal, so they're lasers. So the subspecies that we have of snowy plovers is the western plover that nests here. It's a federally threatened subspecies. There are some threats to its population that are probably pretty familiar to anyone familiar with any species struggling: human activity, habitat loss and degradation, and predation of eggs and chicks. The local population is really well studied. Mark Caldwell led that in large part through the university over 2 decades of really closely monitoring the plover population here, and a lot of graduate students and a lot of management agencies as well. Because of that really extensive monitoring, we've color banded a lot of adults and chicks. I would say 95% of the population has unique color bands, so we can identify individuals. That helps us understand things like survival, so how long are individuals living, as well as inter and intra-seasonal movements. So where are they moving between the breeding season and the winter, or if they're moving within the breeding season, we can try to understand why that is. There's a lot of nest monitoring that happens, and that helps determine egg and chick fate. So this is one of the most prominent strategies used for that, is tracking. And on the left, in the black circle, are raven tracks. On the right are snowy plover tracks. And so nest monitors will try to see if they can identify if a nest fails, what predators' tracks are leading up to it. And finding snowy plover tracks can also be helpful for finding the nests themselves too. There's also a lot of habitat restoration that's happened in the name of snowy plovers, which is really exciting. The pictures I showed of Big Lagoon earlier, that's all restored habitat. And we'll see a photo in a second of unrestored habitat. All of these efforts are super extensive. These monitoring efforts in the breeding season are typically twice a week at like 10 sites in Humboldt County. So there's a lot of people involved, a lot of agencies. Because of all this extensive monitoring, we've learned a lot about the species and how the population is doing, but we've also found out a lot of really interesting stories. Has anyone heard of orange red, yellow red? He is the oldest snowy plover on record, and he is a Humboldt native, 21 years old. Oh my gosh, I don't know, great grandchildren, grand plovers are breeding on our beaches now. He hasn't been seen in a couple years, but if people believe in Bigfoot, I can believe in orange, red, yellow, red. There's been some spicier stuff that we've seen because we can identify individuals like threesomes where there's 2 females and 1 male, as well as a high amount of infidelity. And then there's also some incest. And the threesomes and the incest are typically because of the small population we have here. And sometimes that'll fluctuate by site or by year, but it usually works itself out. Plover management has many facets. Population recovery is supported by monitoring, so understanding the factors that are limiting plover populations is essential if we want to help the plovers. Locally, we do the things listed here. We put up signage to let people know that a nest is nearby, to please stay out of a particular area. Symbolic fencing, called symbolic because it won't actually keep you out, but it lets you know that you should stay out. A lot of outreach. If you guys have seen the docents on the beach, especially during the plover breeding season. Habitat restoration. So up on the left, all the greenery is south of Big Lagoon. That's technically Agate Beach. And to the north is where all the ice plant has been removed. That's habitat restoration. These beaches should look like this. What's pictured here, really sparse vegetation, plovers and a lot of other species like that, including the native dune plants, as well as dog and horse restrictions, especially seasonally. Everywhere else where the western snowy plover nests besides here, they do predator management. And I'm going to talk about that a bit. That involves hazing. It also involves lethal removal. Elsewhere in the plover's range, pretty much everything eats plover eggs. They're just a little snack. Skunks, coyotes, foxes, ravens, crows, harriers, peregrines. So yeah, we're the only place that doesn't manage predators. Okay, the raven wants me to talk about it, and I will oblige. All right, where are the ravens?
All the above.
I heard C and D.
Yeah, C and D.
Okay,
E.
solid on the C and D. Nice job. Does anyone who said C or D or E want to say what they used?
They're trying their tail on.
Uh-huh, yeah,
Now you do.
yes, massive bills. So ravens have a wedge-shaped tail. Their central tail feathers are longer, so it's sort of that shape. And a crow, every tail feather is the same length, so it's more of a fan shape. Yeah, absolutely massive bill. A little shinier, but you can see this crow is pretty shiny too. Shaggier throat feathers, which can be hard to see, and the calls. I wish I had audio on here. I wish I had the calls, but if anyone wants to do a raven call, nice. How about a crow? Excellent. I knew I could count on this crowd.
They do a lot of beat snapping as well.
Yeah, like a yeah, they're pretty weird. So unlike plovers, ravens have a pretty enormous range. They're globally distributed. That's this purple color here, and they don't typically migrate. So they're in these places year round. Their foraging behavior and diet, they're omnivores. They eat everything. This photo here is showing some ravens with an eagle at some carcass. So they're scavengers. I've also seen them hunt. They'll definitely eat prey that can't run away, like eggs or nestlings. I've seen them catch small mammals too, like gophers and voles and mice. They also eat insects and berries, so everything. Their nesting habitat and ecology, ravens are technically songbirds, and their nesting habitat and ecology is like most songbirds. The male and the female work together to build a nest. Sometimes it's on cliffs or in large trees. Sometimes it's on power poles or human structures. It takes about a month for the eggs to incubate, another like 5 or 6 weeks for the chicks to leave the nest, and the parents both provision them during that whole time. Courtship is really sweet. This is an example of allopreening. So one partner will preen the other one, just like arranging its feathers, and it's pretty intimate. And they do this in the breeding season, but they also do it in the winter. They form lifelong bonds. So they continually renew their courtship bonds. Just sweet. There's also this cool display they do called a bowing display. And parental care, I think I just described this. The parents will provision the young until it's time for the young to provision themselves. Ravens are really well studied globally. I think people find them fascinating and they're super intelligent, so we like to study them. They're closely associated with wolves. Why are they associated with wolves? A few reasons, one of which is probably finding food. They know that the wolves are predators, they kill stuff, and the ravens can sneak in and grab stuff.
They're not strong enough to break the skin of the deer.
Yeah, I think they kind of rely on vultures for that. I said multiple reasons, but that's the only one I got. Maybe for the fun of it, ravens.
Why would they associate with any predator or mammal?
Oh,
Besides.
well, wolf, like a mountain lion is pretty cryptic. And I'm sure if a raven saw a mountain lion kill, it would try, but the mountain lion could probably fend off ravens if it so wanted to. But I'm sure a raven would follow a mountain lion around, find its buried kill, and access it that way. So yeah, maybe association with predators is big game predators, probably more accurate. Information sharing. So they share food sources, they share fears, they share secrets. And that probably doesn't sound unusual to us, but it's not super common in the animal world because there's an advantage to knowing where the food is. But for the case of ravens, there's an advantage to having numbers. And also it's sort of an example of their community without anthropomorphizing too much. If I share with you one day, you will probably share with me the next day. They definitely have social relationships, friends as well as enemies. Neophilia and neophobia. So when they're young, they're really attracted to novel things. As they get older, they are afraid of new things, which is silly. Super intelligent and synanthropic, so they closely associate with humans and benefit from our activity. A good example of that is roadkill. They get a lot of food that way. So some global research, or globally, we know that raven populations are increasing in density, especially in Western North America. Like I mentioned, they're omnivores, so that's a problem for everything that ravens predate. They're omnivorous, synanthropic, and quirky, and they're a problem for sensitive species as well as common ones. So these photos here, that's a desert tortoise, marble murrelet, California least tern, and western snowy plover. These are all federally and or state protected species, and ravens are really important predators of all of them. And that's natural, but because there are so many ravens, it's a problem. And then I mentioned common species. These are two young ravens who are being provisioned eggs from the common murre nesting colony off of Trinidad. And it was just nonstop. There's like 3 eggs that they just devoured, and they were certainly not alone. And that poor nesting colony is getting hammered. Yes.
Do you know why they've expanded their ranges and population size so much? Is it just to provide them with food, or is there?
Yeah, in large part, it's the food that we provide. It's also the nesting structures we provide that wouldn't be there without us. So for example, like in the Arctic, farther north, there aren't really, in places where there aren't trees, the ravens could spend a day there, but they can't spend the breeding season there. But now that there's like barns and telephone poles, and ravens can nest there. And the same thing is true for the Mojave, where the desert tortoise is.
How do they attack turtles if turtles sort of How do they get into?
They go after the young ones. So it takes, I think, 10 years for a desert tortoise to reach adult size. And until then, they can just be, if a raven sees it, just flips it over.
Oh.
Yeah. Probably not a fun way to go. Okay, so a variety of strategies have been used and are being used to manage ravens. Some of these strategies aren't super invasive. So raven effigies is sort of like a scarecrow. The idea is that the raven sees this fake stuffed raven and is like, I don't want to go there. That's where death happens. Conditioned taste aversion. The raven eats a fake plover egg, has an unpleasant experience like vomiting, and learns to not do it again. And hazing with sound or light. These strategies are effective under certain circumstances, but not all. And then there's some more invasive methods like roost disturbance. That photo over there is a laser being shot at a raven roost, and they perceive that really strong laser light as an object, and they all take off. Egg oiling, so it's coating eggs in a nest with oil, and that renders them inviable, but the ravens stay on the nest because they don't know their eggs aren't not going to hatch. And then lethal removal, typically done by APHIS, Wildlife Services, the most invasive. So that brings up the origins of this project. We've got ravens on the left, snowy plover on the right. So both of these species are native, and ravens are natural predators of plovers, but we have too many ravens here because of the human food we provide. And we also don't know a lot about the basic biology of the ravens that we have here, especially where they're getting their food resources. So that's where I started my graduate research, with that big goal in mind to just try to answer that question, at least in some way. So I wanted to understand where beach-going ravens were getting their food, especially anthropogenic resources. And it's a pretty exploratory project. There wasn't any particular hypothesis. We knew they're getting human food somewhere. We just wanted to know where. And the management side of things was really strong for this project. So if we could identify those food resources, we could do something about it. Oh yeah, getting ahead of myself. And so all these managers are involved with snowy plovers in Humboldt County. We've got BLM, Department of Fish and Wildlife, the County of Humboldt, State Parks, and the National Park Service. And this was a really collaborative project. There are two main strategies I used to try to address this question. That was GPS tracking beach-going ravens, and that's what you see right here. That's the GPS unit on the back of a raven. And then behavioral surveys with hide counts. And I'll go into what each of those is in the next few slides. So methods. So my study area is coastal Humboldt County, probably really familiar to all of us, specifically the snowy plover nesting areas. So that's where I caught ravens as close to the plover nest areas as I could be without disrupting any activity. And that's where I did the behavioral surveys. For GPS tracking, catching ravens was quite the to-do. Got another video that'll show that. I used human food bait, usually a small amount of Cheetos, a net launcher, and a remote trigger. I usually did this in my car. So like the weirdest field season ever, just sitting in my Subaru in parking lots, watching Cheetos. The GPS units are super cool. I don't know if anyone's familiar with radio telemetry, but that is not what I had to do. I didn't have to follow these birds around. It's sort of like putting a cell phone on a bird. Once I put it on the bird, it was hands off. There's an online account that I checked as much as I wanted to. And the points were collected from satellites and then sent through cell towers. I had them set to collect locations for these ravens every 15 minutes to 2 hours, depending on the amount of service the bird got. And then, yeah, use that online portal to access the data. So here's a video of the net launcher. Those are all ravens, and you see the big orange pile of Cheetos, and the big pile of leaves has the net launcher under it. And I'm like 200 meters away. Yeah. Does anyone want to see it again?
Yes, please.
Avoid Cheetos.
Yeah. They, after this, the ones that got caught were really reluctant to go to it. So yeah, then we booked it down the hill. So that's a picture of those same ravens caught in the net. They usually just sit still when they're caught. And I put my PPE on, so that includes gloves because they have super strong bills and talons, protective eyewear because they certainly know where your eyes are, a mask and a hat because they also know how to identify humans, which is crazy when you think about humans trying to identify individual ravens. I did some banding and took measurements. So this silver band right here, everyone who's not working with a tribe and banding birds in the US has to put one of these silver bands on a bird, and they're distributed by the USGS, and it just helps us keep track of what we're doing. Otherwise, I could put out the same number as someone else and we'd catch each other's birds and it would be messy. And then I also had these purple bands with unique numbers and letters so I could identify individuals in the field. Then the birds were released, and that was a joyous time for all. And then tracking and observation ensued. So the GPS units did all the tracking for me, but I did a lot of observations to see if ravens had partners, what they were doing, what they were eating, etc. Yes. Not around the wings because I don't want to impede their flight. Initially I started with a chest strap harness, which it's sort of like a backpack that's joined at the front. And then I switched to a leg loop harness, which is just around their legs on the inside. So yeah, it was quite the process. Takes about 10 minutes with ideally 3 people, but usually just me. Yeah, and then it stays on for their life, which is a really big bummer. Any sort of material that would come off or after a designated amount of time would have been torn off immediately. So I had to use Teflon ribbon, which is super strong. So aging ravens was a lot of fun. So can everyone see the different colored feathers on this raven over here? So that's an extreme example of a molt limit. Those really worn brown feathers were grown in all at once when the bird hatched. And the shiny black glossy feathers were grown in sequentially over a longer period of time. So depending on the time of year, well, this bird is a 2nd-year bird, so it hatched the previous year. An older bird wouldn't have that extreme of wear on its older feathers unless it was in really, really, really bad shape. And then their mouths change color as they age. So when they hatch, they're bright pink. And I think that's to let the parent know, like, this is where you put the food. So as the ravens age, their mouths turn black. It's also impacted by dominance. So a more dominant raven gets a black mouth quicker than a more subordinate raven. And sometimes you can see that pink mouth in the field, like especially in like May or June or July next year. If you see a bird calling, see if you can see if its mouth is pink. GPS units, I analyzed the data that they provided in a few different ways. One was ground truthing potential food resources. So if a raven was continually visiting particular areas, I would go check those out. There are a lot of visual observations of tag ravens to determine territoriality. So that was a lot of fun, just watching a tag raven and seeing if it was aggressive or submissive or had a partner. I used the location data to figure out where their home ranges were and how big they were, as well as their core areas. So home range is about 95% of where the bird moves. It excludes the 5% outermost points, and then the core area is even more centralized than that. And then I also developed a model called a resource selection function, which I will explain right here. So the purpose of a resource selection function is to understand which features are attractive to ravens, which are not, and which don't really matter at all. And to explain this, I have my dogs. So if I were to put GPS units on my dogs while they were home, here's my home. It's got all these features in it. And say I leave for 6 hours, and here are their location points. So resource selection function would let me input these location points and see like, okay, the water bowl over here is attractive. So is the window. Turns out they like to bark. They also like their toy box. They don't like the vacuum. And they don't like the bathtub. And they like something over here that
Sleep there.
yeah, something's happening over here that I didn't measure. Oh, it's my cat. Poor Bob. They bothered him all day. So what I can do for the resource selection function is I take these points, I put it in a model, and it helps me understand what's attractive and what's not. And the whole point is not for me to understand how they're using my house, because I know that based on these points, but it's so that I can extrapolate to someone else's house, like my sister's house, who also has a vacuum and a window and a cat and a toy box and a water bowl and a bathtub. So without even bringing my dogs to her house, I'd be able to make this sort of heat map and understand what my dogs might do, make a prediction. How'd I do? That makes sense. Nice. Pictures of pets. Can't lose. So I also did behavioral surveys. A lot of this information provided some useful anecdotes. There were a lot of encounters with people who were intentionally feeding wildlife, and observations of territoriality. Again, and then there was some quantitative stuff like hide counts. So that's for every hour-long survey, I was counting the number of ravens I saw. That helps understand how many ravens are there. Does it change within a season or between years or between seasons? And how does it compare to other places? Someone asked in the chat how long it takes to tag and band a bird. For me, by myself, it takes about an hour. If I have help, about 30 minutes. If I have experienced help. Okay, so let's go into the results, finally. So from the GPS data, there was a lot of really useful point sources of food subsidies that were identified. This is like 3 days of data from one raven, and it really highlights, not all these bullet points are that raven, but all these yellow triangles are individual sources of places where the raven got human food. So the animal shelter, the Coast Guard station, the parking lot, someone is kind of regularly seen on Clam Beach, just like leaving a trail of dog food behind them. Which is a huge bummer because this was a really hot plover nesting area. And this raven that is tagged here, whose points you're seeing, was seen trying to snag a chick this year. And it spends a lot of time at that beach.
Is the nest where they all come together? Is that where they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's a video of a different tagged raven, and that's its fledgling begging for food. and then stealing food from his own father. The dad is like, whoa, and he's learning his own skills. So this is just a perfect example of a tagged raven near a plover nesting area, eating human food and teaching his young to do the same. Here is another example of a human food subsidy. This is someone's private residence. This person feeds a few cups of dog food every single day. Yeah, there are a couple crows in there, and I don't know if anyone noticed, there's also 1 or 2 injured ravens in there. So these food subsidies are sort of, they either like keep these injured or diseased birds alive or give them time to heal. And they can also act as reservoirs for diseases. Like these ravens here, there's not really places where they can congregate this densely. So if one of these ravens is sick, they might all get sick soon. Because of the human food. So in total, I was able to catch 22 ravens between March 2021 and January 2024. 15 of them were males, 6 were females, 7 were breeders, the rest were not. The average home range size was 47 square kilometers. In the breeding season or in the winter, it was almost 3 times that large. So they move around a lot more in the winter. And their core areas were a lot smaller. So I'm just gonna zoom in on this map really quick. This is where I had most of the ravens tagged, but you can sort of see the diversity of home range sizes, which are these colored polygons. So there's one, like this tiny blue one right here is super small versus this giant like red-orange one is a lot bigger. So there's a lot of variability in the size of these home ranges. Yes.
Would you, or did you find like, because you were saying young birds are, philic, would young birds have a wider range potentially if they're not afraid of new stuff?
Yeah, it wasn't like a clear-cut, obvious difference between younger and older ones. And that's wrong. Yes, in the breeding season, absolutely. In the winter, some of the older ones would really expand their home range and some wouldn't. And what I don't know is if that was at all linked to like nest failure or nest success. Like if they successfully nested, maybe they don't take off. But in general, yeah, the younger ones move more. Someone in the chat asked about bird flu, and I will answer that in a few slides. So here's a little more of that variation. So this is a home range right here, really tiny, and that's another home range right there, just the smallest compared to the biggest. Pretty crazy. And then there's also differences within individuals. So this red polygon is Raven 70 in 2022, and the yellow polygon is the year before. So in 2022, this raven nested, so you could see he moved a little bit less. He didn't cross the bay quite as much because his nest was over here on the spit. And then some more variation within individuals. This pink polygon is the breeding season and blue is the winter for the same raven. So this is an example of them moving a lot more in the winter. So my model results, don't worry about any of this. It's just highlighting how in the green, these features were attractive to the ravens. They liked the sand, they liked the plover nesting areas. I think that's the most important takeaway from this. And in the red, those are the things they didn't like. I was really surprised that they didn't like roads, but maybe that sort of highlights how my tagged population is sort of biased because I caught them at the beach. Or it could be true for all ravens here. I'm not sure. And I think this is more fun, the predictive map. So this is sort of the same thing that I just showed you, but in map form from the model that I ran with the GPS data. So the yellow is unattractive. The dark purple is attractive. So they really interestingly, I thought they would love Eureka and the cities, but they don't. They like the forests. And it's kind of hard to see, and I gotta stop touching the screen. But they really like the beaches. It's a really thin purple line. Which also makes sense because my population was all caught at the beach. Don't worry too much about this chart either. It's just showing you quantitatively that there were fewer ravens at most of the sites I surveyed in 2023. Less than half. Greater than 50% reduction. Good question. So between 2022 and 2023, avian influenza hit pretty much the whole West Coast, and it's still here, but it's not having as big an impact. 70% of the GPS tagged ravens died from avian influenza. Some of them were sent to a lab and they tested positive. The rest just exhibited the same signs, but were too degraded to be tested. So I think that 50%, 55% reduction is from avian influenza. Interestingly, when a GPS tagged raven died, its territory was occupied by a new bird really, really quickly. So these are hot spots to be.
And they'd have been their territory.
Up until their last days. So this was sort of acting as a natural removal experiment. A lot of people were pointing out that the plovers did better after avian influenza knocked out a lot of the ravens. And some people are using that to advocate for lethal removal of ravens. The difference between those two things, though, is that avian influenza hit all the ravens equally. Lethal removal would just target the beaches. And so, like I said, with their newly vacant territories getting occupied almost immediately, that the same thing would happen, I think, if we removed ravens from beaches. If you can't tell, I'm really in opposition to lethal removal.
So who came up with that?
I don't know who came up with it, but a lot of people are practicing it, a lot of agencies. I mean, there's a lot of constraints on agencies, like they need to recover these populations, like they need to boost snowy plovers, and they can only do things on their properties, and they've only got so much money, but really advocating for a landscape level approach to raven management, and that would benefit all the species they predate, like the common birds I showed earlier. And I'm showing here again. And I even have a solution. Here's one more video. So this is the laser being used at the night roost. Like I mentioned earlier, they perceive the laser as an object. It doesn't hurt them, but it really bothers them and they leave. And they are increasingly sensitive to it over time. It's being used in the Mojave for desert tortoises to shoo them away from food subsidy sites. And we are trying to bring it up here also for the same thing. You can see thousands of ravens taking off from that like less than 5-second laser shot.
Where do we go?
Well, we stopped using the laser, and so eventually, like 10 minutes later, they all settled down again, which just sort of highlights that you got to use it randomly and repeatedly for a little while at least. And that is all I have. Lasers, that's my concluding thought.
The light show.
Yeah, so Barbara Klukas in the middle here was my graduate advisor. She's amazing. My committee members, all the students who helped me, this is such a big project, lots of funders. So thanks to all these people. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
Yes.
How tough is life for those plovers?
Oh.
What's a success rate for young?
It's pretty tough. It depends on the year and the beach, and the weather. The hatch rate, oh gosh. Hatch rate is probably like 10%. And then fledging rate, maybe around the same. The recovery goal is to have, for every male plover, to produce 1.5 chicks on average a year. We've met that a few times, but not most of the time.
I go to Plan Beach a lot and we do a Plan Beach to the north and stuff. Has any plover even expressed any interest in that whole area?
So Clam Beach, not for a long time. It used to be a really hot spot. And then the mouth of the Mad moved, and now they're at Mad River. And it made that part of Clam Beach really accessible to people.
Yeah.
Plus, there's a ton of European beach grass, and climate change just like wiping that area out every now and then. Little River also used to be a hotspot, which has a habitat restoration area. They had a nest there a few years ago successfully, but there are just so many ravens there. So no plovers there. They're there in the winter though.
From Little River
Mhm.
down to the county parking lot. 'Cause everything from there is state north and the county south.
Yeah.
All of that work done for the environmental work.
Uh-huh.
Has it done anything positive yet?
Well, it was done, this past spring? I think that's way too soon for the plovers to respond, but they are likely checking it out and figuring out that it's there. It can take a couple years for plovers to try out a newly restored area. And hopefully it spreads the ravens out that are there. So we'll see. I would give it a few years.
So
Is ravens and plovers the traditional competing? And what's the history about who survives and reproduces more?
Yeah, I think as long as there have been plovers, there have been ravens predating them. I would imagine, because plovers, they have a few different areas, they're in like around the Great Salt Lake, and they're on the coast, and ravens have been on the coast naturally forever. There are just so many ravens. And
It's so smart.
yeah, and they're so smart. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, they're like, hey, you're home.
So I've observed ravens on the beach a lot of times just playing because they're flying that and picking stuff out of the surf. So they're actually eating other stuff. They're not just after the plovers.
Yes. Yeah, there was a research project that figured out that the ravens are cueing into the plovers moving on and off their nests, and that's how they locate the nests the majority of time. So the more disturbance there is, the higher the chance that they're going to see them, that the ravens are going to see the plovers, and also the more ravens that are there, just in general, the higher the chance that the plover is going to get.
And then the plovers have
spotted.
moved to some other, habitats. I've seen them at the airports where they're quite successful because nobody bothers them. And I've seen them on roofs, like in Walmart and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What is the nesting season for the plovers?
Technically it's, oh my gosh, March 15th. Yeah, I want to say it's March 15th or March 1st. That's like the earliest it could be, but there's been in a dry year, they started in late February. Okay, there was a question in the chat. Oh, someone hears imitated sounds around their neighborhood, like clicking and machine sounds. Yeah, ravens definitely make a little clicky noise. I think we were talking about that earlier, like, and I think I've seen videos where people can teach their pet raven a few words. Not quite like a parrot, but they can imitate under the right scenario. I don't know if that's really well documented in wild ravens.
Seen something before, and I honestly don't know if it was ravens or crows, to tell you the truth. There's this big gathering of them in the skies, like big swirls of hundreds of them. Is this something that happens occasionally with them, and those are starlings? Yeah.
Oh no, I've seen ravens and crows do that. It sort of depends on where you are. I really only see crows do that here. And then Portland and Seattle both have really well-known crow populations that do that. Yeah, I think what that is they're like, it's time to go to bed. And then they all gather and then they all take off. And then they sort of do the same thing in the morning. And there are places where ravens do that too. Like the laser video I showed, they did that all like 30 minutes before we shot the laser. They're like, okay, it's time to settle in.
So do they have roosts?
How do
Yes.
they interact with crows?
And in that case, like roost telephone lines. But yeah, I think here they're a lot smaller, but they'll roost in like private timberland. They're not going to get disturbed there. I think they're really, really small roosts in the community forest. Did someone ask a question?
How do they interact with crows?
Oh, it's
Oh,
antagonistically. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like my house is perfectly positioned to see endless drama. Yeah, if the crows outnumber the ravens, they'll definitely kick them out. And they often do because crows keep their family around a lot longer than ravens do.
They're kind of related to each other of sorts.
They're both corvids. Yeah.
I mean, is there any possibility they could interbreed like polar bears and grizzlies and coyote wolves and I mean stuff like that, you know?
It hasn't happened. Yeah, I think they're far enough separated, or they're just disgusted with each other. Like, I would never. Yeah.
Meaning that juvenile flocks try to overwhelm mated bears to get their opportunity to feed. Did you see some of that?
It's it gets really spicy. So if there's like three raven friends, and two of them start to pair off, one can interfere because it knows that once those two pair off, they'll be stronger than the three of them together. Yeah, there's a lot of drama, but yeah, it would take a lot of young ravens, like, because the territorial pair, they know each other, they've been together for years. They're smarter and stronger and more aggressive. So it wouldn't just be like three young ones could overtake two. It would probably be like 6 or 7 or more. Yeah. Someone asked how plovers are handling sea rise and massive rogue waves wiping out beaches. Yeah, there are plover nests that get destroyed by high tides, which are getting higher and higher. Some of those would have happened because the plover needs to learn to put it up a little bit higher, but a lot of them are because of rising sea levels. It's pretty sad. And that's just going to get more frequent. So the more habitat we can restore, the better. And someone also asked if East Coast and West Coast ravens are different. I'm sure they are. I'm sure one of them is a little bit bigger and one's a little smaller. I bet they sound like slightly different because they're not moving across the country. Yeah, like even Southern California versus like Washington ravens, there's a size difference.
I think that their mitochondrial DNA or something indicates a very deep sleep.
And yeah, unless that research's been overturned, at least 20 years ago, that was the case in California.
I didn't hear that question.
The question was the East Coast, West Coast Ravens, that one?
No, he just said.
Oh, I wasn't asking a question. It was a comment, but so 20 years ago, somebody looked at the mitochondrial DNA of a bunch of ravens. And very deep split between quote California ravens and the rest of them, the Washington ravens. But there's also the Chihuahuan raven, which is very, very
Small and buggy-eyed. I don't know if that's true. Yeah, there are.
They're all flashing, but they just like the raven.
Really giddy. Okay, well, I think that's it for questions in the chat. I hope I didn't miss any. Okay.
Hey, Janelle, I just added some information about the relationship between wolves and ravens.
So my advisor and I created a brochure to encourage people to not feed ravens. Yes.
Yeah, so this is on the little table as you walk out. Feel free to take one. Yes.
Yes, please. I have hundreds.
Huh? To take one. No.
To not feed them, yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Are there any laws against feeding them?
Yes, technically you're not supposed to feed wildlife at all. Like you're not even supposed to feed songbirds with a backyard feeder. I don't know if it would ever be enforced. Ravens might be enforced on a beach because of the plovers. Yeah, technically yes.
Just want to let you all know that next month, December, I can't believe I'm saying next month is December, but it is. First Wednesday of the month, we have a wonderful presenter who happens to be here, Al Bauer. And I have to look at my notes to give you the technical title of his presentation. It started out being called eDNA. We're like, well, what is eDNA? So the title of his presentation is From Water to Wildlife Using eDNA Metabarcoding to Monitor Fish Diversity in Northern California. So let's all wrap our brains around that. And we got,
It's a mouthful, but we'll get through it all.
Yeah,
We'll make
so you've got just about 4 weeks to do your research and come with some really good questions for Al Bauer. Really appreciate all of you to take the time to come and learn in community.
Did you say the ones up north were bigger typically?
Yes.
I see really big ones. You just see one island, and they're like, whoa.
Yeah, it might be like hundreds of grams.
Yeah.
Like you don't even see it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for saying hi. Hi. How are you doing? Good.